So, rice, arisi, chaul in Bengali, chokha in Gujarati, chawal in Hindi, akki in Kannada, tomul in Kashmiri, ari in Malayalam, tandul in Marathi, chola in Odia, biyam in Telugu. There's really no denying that food has the ability to trigger so many memories, and that the most nourishing and comforting meal, if we were to recall, has in some way a connection to our home and to that bowl of rice. The rice, for me personally, has been, and I'm sure a lot of you will agree, has been a symbol of comfort, of nourishment, of a sense of nurturing, and it's really sort of packed with calories that are integral to the sustenance of the body, the mind, and the soul. Needless to say, while we were curating our sustenance series, we almost organically thought of Spirit of the Earth, which is a beautiful initiative of the NGO Aim for Seva that I and Alap have had the opportunity of to work very closely with. And Jayanti, who is going to be anchoring this session, is also a very dear friend. And I've really followed her very passionate journey towards, really keeping the story alive and innovating with it so interestingly. And I'm going to allow her to speak about all that, but just give me a second to introduce Spirit of the Earth, and then I'm going to have my colleague introduce this very eminent panel that we have today to discuss the idea of rice and shine, as this panel is called. Spirit of the Earth, like I already said, is set up by the NGO Aim for Seva. And they conserve and cultivate heritage rice organically. They have a 50-acre farm in a village called Manjakudi near Kumbakonam, and I had the privilege of visiting that farm last year, thanks to Sheila Balaji and Jayanti. Incidentally, Manjakudi, for those who don't know, is the Janmabhoomi of Swami Dayananda Saraswati, who's the founder also of the NGO. At Spirit of the Earth, they have been able to preserve close to 245 varieties of heritage rice seeds from across India. In Chennai, the center has they have an immersion center where they host a range of culinary demos, talks, and coffee sessions, and offer about 30 varieties of heritage rice. I'm going to request my colleague Subiksha to please introduce this panel and then set the tone for the discussion that we've planned ahead. Over to you, Subiksha.
Thank you so much, and thank you to our panelists who have agreed to be with us today. I'll start off with Dr. Dharani Krishnamurthy. With a doctorate in nutrition and dietetics, she is a registered dietitian who is the former national president of the Indian Dietetic Association and also the former chairperson of its registered board. She has developed her own software, Digest, for diet calculations, and also an app, NutriTracks, to calculate calories on the go. She is a genetic counselor and is currently practicing as a consultant dietitian at Chennai. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us.
And Thank you so much.
And Dr. Kurush S. Dalal. Dr. Dalal is a postgraduate in archaeology, and he also holds a PhD that works around the early Iron Age in Rajasthan. He then worked on the early medieval period, predominantly on the west coast of India, and he has also excavated sites like Tanjan, Chandor, and Mandar. Dr. Dalal also actively works on memorial stones, numismatics, defense archaeology, architecture, and allied disciplines. He has recently blended his passion for food and archaeology into a research in culinary anthropology and food archaeology. Since October 2019, he is a consulting editor with Life History India and continues to research archaeology and culinary anthropology, and also runs a very successful course called the Study Food Workshop, where he teaches food and beyond the usual topics. Thank you so much, sir, for being with us. Last but not the least is Jayanti ma'am, who is an active person who's been working with food for a very long time. and she's also a freelance writer, and she's a very integral part of Spirit of the Earth, and she is the one who has put together this panel for today's discussion. Thank you so much for this, ma'am.
Jayanti, without much ado, maybe we can ask you to kind of open the session and talk to us about the premise and the philosophy and what you have at Spirit of the Earth, and then we can open it out for a discussion.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, like Akila said, first I'd like to ask, Akila, did you know the name rice actually originated from the word arisi?
Oh, no,
yes.
I have no idea.
Yeah, so from the Tamil word arisi, it took on different forms, and then it went into Italian, Greek, and so forth, and finally it came down to rice. So just when it just hit me. Yeah, so Spirit of the Earth was launched just about 2 years ago. But like Akila had said, the whole project starts off in a village called Manjakudi, which is the Janmabhoomi of Swami Dayananda Saraswati. And so the NGO Aim for Seva primarily sets up schools and works in empowering rural communities. And that's how we were working in this village, Manjakudi. And as far as the eye could see, there was only agricultural fields around. And about around 2011, I think the Seva Rice campaign was just kicking off in Tamil Nadu. And, there was a lot of noise coming on about traditional rice and so forth. So Mrs. Sheila Balaji, who's the chairperson of the NGO, had attended this festival, and she came to know about the different kinds of rice and, traditional varieties and how we've lost so many strains of rice. And then that led to when she came back to Manjakudi, when she decided, let's to our bit, let's kind of revive just 1 or 2 grains. That's all we wanted to do. So from that, it led on to we organized a seed festival for about 300 villages in that region. Farmers came in, they took seeds from us, traditional varieties of seeds, and there was a lot of discussion on why it's important to bring it back. So a lot of education related activity was happening for about 5 years in the village, and even then we didn't think about setting up a store or bringing it to the city. I think about 5 years after that, we met up with all the farmers that we shared seeds with, and we asked them, so what are you doing with the seeds? I mean, you took us, these are very difficult to get, these seeds, so what is happening? And they said, yeah, it's here, we've kept it alive. So we said, why aren't you cultivating it? And that's when they said, well, unless there's a market for it, why should we cultivate it? Nobody even knows it except you and me.
Right.
So that point kind of triggered it off for us, and we said, okay, maybe as an NGO, we need to raise awareness on these grains. I had about 100,000 varieties, and now we have less than 1,000 that are available, and even within the 1,000, people know only about 2 or 3 strains in those particular regions. So that kind of sparked it off, and that's when we set up this little immersion center in the city. And in time, also we started off with 2 South Indian grains, Maple Champa, and I think it was Tuyamalli. And from there, we've been able to collect about 245 varieties of rice seeds from farmers across the country. And there's a conservation effort that takes place at the farm. And also we cultivate about 40 varieties every season. And we bring this to the store here, and that's where Dr. Dharmi's come, Akila's come, where we do a lot of workshops and events, and we try and make some noise on these grains and bring up health benefits and so forth. Yeah. So that's how we start. And the primary focus of Spirit of the Earth is to raise an awareness. It's sales is secondary, but we want people to be more conscious of how they live, be very mindful of their children, Yeah.
Jayanti, I'm before I ask Dr. Dalal and Dr. Dharmi a question, you used the word immersion center and not a retail store. I'm curious to understand why you decided to call it an immersion center, and why is it important for people to really engage with the food that they eat, and not at a very superficial level, just eat what is on your plate. But why is it important to know that every grain is packed with so much history and culture and heritage and all of that?
Well, okay. So immersion centers, because we were very clear when we set out, we're not here to make profit on it. We're not here. We didn't want to be another organic store selling grains. You know, that would have been quite easy. And, you know, that would have, I mean, we don't have to put so much of effort into it at all. We set up a store, and right now everybody's in the organic bandwagon. Everybody wants organic food. We believe that for any change to be sustainable, consumers have to be well informed. They need to know what they're buying, where their food is made out of. So once they're equipped with this kind of knowledge, the kind of choices they make will be long-standing. So that's why we're very conscious. You know, people come in and they learn about what they're picking up, and for us at least, for every rice has a story. It's not like a ponni or a BPT 45 that we just get at a rice mandi. Those are mass-produced variants. These grains have been cherished by farmers. For instance, when we go about collecting seeds, we get only about 50 grams of seeds from farmers. And you know, and when a farmer gives it to us, he tells us, you know, you have to look after it. There's a lot of emotion involved when he gives it out to us, and so we've taken a lot of care to document all of this, and we want people to appreciate it as well, because these are native to India.
Right. Speaking of documenting, you know, use the word documenting, and we have amidst us an anthropologist. So I'm going to ask you, Dr. Dalal, about, you know, in many Asian countries, there are like many stories around the rice goddess and rice. Is there any such literature in India? Any famous stories that you can share with us?
So what you have to understand about rice in India, and forgive me for this having a preamble before I come to your question as such, is that India has been growing rice for at least the last 7,000 years. So most of the literature that we have available to us cannot be dated back beyond, say, about 3,500 to 4,000 years. You know, even if we're pushing the traditional literature settings for the Vedic texts. So the earliest rice that we know about from literature actually comes from the Yajurveda. And the Yajurveda talks about rice and rice preparations, and talks about rice being offered to the gods in the form of rice cakes. So if it's being offered to the gods, obviously it is a premium commodity, and therefore it is a very important dish that is eaten and consumed, and an aspirational food right from the time of the Yajurveda, which would be somewhere around 1000 to 1500 BC, according to most scholars. The tradition of goddesses and being associated with rice only comes up much later in what we call the greater tradition in the very early medieval period, where you have very interesting transformations of the mother goddesses from being, you know, we have a term in Marathi, Navsachi Devi, goddesses of propitiation. So goddesses which had to be propitiated till now are suddenly becoming these very sweet, benevolent goddesses that are giving for the joy of giving. And this is when the goddesses of rice come into being in India. So we have very, very interesting relationships between Parvati, Lakshmi, Gauri, and Annapurna, who all become part of the rice deities. Akhila, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry, yeah.
So, what happens is, if there's one deity that's very, very specifically rice-oriented, that's Annapurna. And Annapurna supposedly in the east is a version of Parvati. At other places, Annapurna is an extension of Lakshmi. So, you know, these are basically the mother goddess cults that are becoming part of the Shaivite Vaishnavite pantheons, and both are vying for the same kind of attributes. So since the goddesses are traditionally goddesses of fertility, and rice is the premium staple crop of the country, I mean, virtually across the country, even in the wheat eating belt, rice is the premium staple crop. So automatically these goddesses then become champions of rice, and rice becomes a very, very important part of their worship. So Annapurna is regularly worshipped with rice. Gauri at the wedding is worshipped with rice. Lakshmi is worshipped with rice. So these goddesses of the greater pantheon are automatically associated with rice.
Right. Thank you for that, Dr. Dalal. I'm going to ask Dr. Dharani, the thing is that unfortunately, over the last, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, rice has also come under under the scanner for being like, oh, rice is carbs, and if you eat rice, you'll gain weight. I want you to talk about, about just the sustenance quality of rice, and why are we so, in some way, why are we paranoid about rice? There's one group of people that's really paranoid. This is the staple that we all grew up eating. Like now everybody's like, don't eat rice, rice after weight. I'm like, could you please help us, break that myth and share your insights on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. First is because we made rice as white as the salwar or the shirt that we wear. So all the goodness of rice is almost gone and only starch is left. So this is one problem. And today with so much of junk food, we've gone on to the, on the weighing scale to the wrong side, that even 10-year-olds who walk into my clinic are 80 kilos. It's so surprising.
Yeah.
So in this whole thing, the poor thing that got sacrificed in the altar is rice. Okay? Because they said everything white, and to the point sometimes even milk is sacrificed. So white became the problem. But definitely if we can move towards these traditional varieties, they're fantastic. Because in my home personally, I don't use white rice at all. I get, different types of traditional rice or semi-polished and things like that. But when we tell them to the patients, the only problem is, they do say that it is a little more expensive than the regular thing, so we are not able to use, is the general message. When I always tell them, more of you joining, economics will work and it will come down, the price will come down. But talking about any traditional rice, the beauty is I can have quarter of my regular white rice and I'm totally full. And not only full in satiety, which is, I feel full, not only that, I'm full in nutrients too. Like, have we spoken about rice having B vitamins? Have we spoken about iron? Have we spoken about the good fat in rice? All of us know rice bran oil, but we're not linking the two. The educated population is not really linking the two, that rice is the one giving the good fat also. So we need to educate people in a big way, saying that rice is not a demon. The white rice can be used minimally, and we can move to traditional rice, and we can make every item that we make out of rice in that. And that was the fantastic workshop that Jayanti had done when I had gone there to talk about rice, where they had made fantastic dishes out of the traditional varieties, which taste better than the white rice. That is what I would like to say. But of course, my patients complain, saying that, the sambar doesn't taste the same as in white rice. It's only a cultivation of the taste that requires. The moment you know that nourishment is there, automatically we should shift it.
Right. Jayanti, would you say that one of the, in the immersion center, do you also engage with your customers in a way that you kind of understand their particular, what they're looking for? Like, it's possible that I may walk into the store and may not really, like Dr. Dharani said, there are different varieties of rice, and I read that there are 35 varieties of rice that you stock. So how does one navigate that variety, and how do I make the right deliberate sort of decision as to what rice I must be, buying?
So what we actually do is we kind of, we encourage everyone to try different kinds of rice. We say consider it like a vegetable. Each one comes with their own nutritious qualities. So you need to alternate your rice. Besides that, we classified the rice into everyday table rice, dessert rice, for salads, if you're looking at medicinal rice, like we have Navara, or we have Kapakar and Kartakar. All these are red grains which are medicinal, and they have been used for certain treatments. So we kind of understand what kind of grains they want. There's also a personal preference, like some people only like fine long grains, and some people like short grains, and some people wanted to make your pulaus and biryanis, and some people wanted to make you know. So based on those kind of requirements, we suggest, but we often tell them, you know, don't stick to one rice. In your lifetime, if you had the opportunity to taste every rice India is native to India, you just won't be able to complete it. So yeah. So in line with that, there is something that I've been wanting to ask Dr. Purush for a while, and I've made a note of it. Just like you had said, you know, when people walk into the store, they kind of associate, you know, a premium rice, like Dr. Dharni did say, it is a little bit more expensive than what you get in the market. The main question they ask me is, do you have basmati rice? And we don't have basmati rice because honestly, we've not been able to get the pure heirloom seed of basmati. So we don't grow it, but we've given them umpteen options from, I mean, there are so many. I have about 15 varieties of fragrant rice right now at the store, which are long grain, short grain, and mid-sized grains, Ambe Mohar, Maruveya, Katarni, Gobindabhog, Gandakasala. I mean, we have so many right now. But what is it with basmati and everybody only looking out for basmati? And where does basmati actually originate from? I think a lot of people have a lot of misconceptions around that grain.
Oof, that is now, Akhila's going to have to probably extend into another hour after this, just because that's how much time I'm going to take to probably address this question. But to make it short, all food is aspirational. India has a serious lack of commensality, and it has a serious problem of people being demarcated into castes and castes being demarcated into food groups. People of the lower castes have traditionally not eaten upper caste rice. In fact, in many places, they do not eat rice. Therefore, rice becomes intensely aspirational. The more expensive varieties of rice become even more aspirational. So this is much more than just the taste of rice. This is about, you know, aspiring to eat the rice that rich people eat, number one. Number two, most of the basmati that you get in the market today is a hybrid American short grain rice, a long grain rice. Some of it is ridiculously long. I've seen rice that, well, when cooked is this long. I can't eat it. Okay? And it doesn't really do much for the rice. It looks very beautiful.
Yeah.
So you see, the thing about basmati rice is that it is a long grain rice, a fragrant rice, and a non-sticky rice. These have been the three characteristics of a good basmati. That's incredibly fragrant. It is a long grain rice with low starch content. And therefore, it makes very good pulao, not necessarily biryani. Biryani doesn't necessarily need basmati. So in fact, most biryani makers use something called steam basmati, which is, well, the furthest thing from basmati available. But that's what they use because it has a higher starch content. It binds beautifully together in a biryani. And of course, you have samba silam and things like that if you go to South India for the typical biryanis that you eat there.
Yeah.
So the whole thing about basmati is one, aspirational. Two, it's a lot of marketing hype. Because it was a very exclusive rice, it was cooked in the Himalayan, it was grown in the Himalayan foothills. It was a difficult rice to grow with not a very high yield. It was an expensive rice. So where is the biggest margin for a trader is in the most expensive product that you can sell. Because if you've got a percentage-wise margin, and a lot of people are going to hate me for saying this live, if you've got a percentage-wise margin on your product, the more expensive the product, the more money you're going to make.
Yeah.
As simple as that. So if you're going to sell 5 rupees a kilo rice and you're going to sell 50 rupees a kilo rice, and you're going to make 10% on both, you're definitely going to push your 50 rupees a kilo rice.
Yeah.
So I remember a time when very good quality basmati was available. It was cooked in houses and it was cooked on special occasions. It was a special occasion, once in a while rice. My mother ran a catering business and we shifted to a cheaper basmati variant purely because that is what was expected from the business. And I've tried very often to convince my clients that an Ambe Mohar actually does far better in Western India than a basmati does. And that's what I eat at home, by the way. But it doesn't really work. I'm married to a Bengali. I love Gobindabhog rice. I can eat Gobindabhog by itself, not as payasam, you know. And their biryani is made in Dhaka using Govinda Bhog rice. So the whole point here is that it's marketing, it's aspiration, it's the cost factor. All of these play a very interesting role, and therefore you feel that basmati rice is the best rice.
Wow.
The perception.
That's fantastic. Dr. Dalal, I'm going to, speaking about, varieties, I'm going to ask Dr. Dharini a question about, there is white. This morning, actually, I was talking to Jayanti and I was asking her, like, can you recommend a rice for me? Like, which one should I be having? White, brown, red, black? What is your take on the colors that sort of distinguish these? And which one would you think is healthy, like healthier, so to speak?
All are healthy, but how good is your digestive system is a very important message to us.
Right.
How much of fiber can it sustain? I know of moms, because I'm in different groups where moms are asking questions on diet. And for a newborn, after 6 months of weaning, they try to give black rice. See, this is not correct. Yeah. So we are getting too fastidious about what is health and what is not health. And there is no one size that fits all. Right. So we need to first realize how important our digestive system is. If you can handle the less polished and the black and the dark red, which is definitely more fiber, fantastic for you. And in case, God forbid, you're diabetic and you go for the low glycemic, that's one of the reasons, Jayanti, because low glycemic is basmati. Whereas for none of the rice that you guys have, you have done that branding. If you start saying that traditional rice is low glycemic, I did see your note where you have said it's good for diabetes. But on the same note, it's good to say that more fiber we believe would be that it will be lower glycemic. Because it will be less you can eat and the sugars will release slow and it will have more of protein. Right? The more you polish, the protein and the fat and the fiber is gone. Right? So basmati has been put in that drum, saying it is lower glycemic, which is one of the reasons because everybody is talking about diabetes today. Right? Even young kids are talking about diabetes, which is not, not surprising, because as I said, if a 10-year-old is 80 kilos, by the time the kid is 17 or 16, obviously they're going to be worried, right? Because they're going to be 100 kilos by then, right? So I think we should portray these rice in two phases. One is weight reduction and one is diabetes. And I think we'll make the market, because everybody is looking at these two concepts, right? But as I said, they don't like the sambar in it. We can make excellent desserts. Like you had made a rice cake, I remember. Yes, Dr. Kushal, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to say that, it's also about the kind of work that we do, Dharini ma'am. The kind of energy expended by people in the past working in a rural environment and that kind of rice intake is not commensurate to the kind of energy expended by us today. And that is something that people don't take into consideration at all when they blame rice. They're eating far more than they need.
Yeah, the reason we are eating is the white rice. Like just take an example of a Sunday where pulao is made, the vegetable is so minimal. Or because of working culture of both spouses, what happens is they invariably have 3 to 4 days a week of mixed rice. Even if it's not a basmati, if it's the South Indian variety also, for lime rice or puli rice or coconut rice. So what happens is there is no vegetable with it. And the rice itself has no fiber. So what do? We end up eating lots because we are hungry, right?
Yes.
So that is the problem. The problem is polishing the rice. Too much polishing, too much trouble. That is the problem. So I don't know whether I answered Akhila's
question. Absolutely. I wanted to ask you one more question. Maybe you can just answer it in short before I move to Jayanti. Dr. I've been noticing that some people also say that you have to keep not just eat one variety of rice, that you need to mix your rice. So you need to include like 2 to 3 varieties. Would you agree with that?
Definitely, because the type of nutrients are different, no? And that makes a huge difference. to the way, and some taste good in something. So like that also, both ways if you see, because food is not just nutrients. Food also has to satisfy the brain and psychology. Like khichdi or pongal in the south and khichdi in the north is such a favorite food because mummy gave it to me, right? So we need to hold that on. Yeah.
Right. Jayanti, you have probably, over the last 2 years, meeting so many people who've been, innovating with these rice varieties. Could you share some interesting stories or interesting, anecdotes from the many, people you've interacted with who have used this rice and how they have kind of articulated it in their food?
So, yeah, I think that was one of the first challenges we faced in the 6 months, because they just said, yeah, it's just rice. What can you do with it, and so then we took it upon ourselves and we said, let's start a little test kitchen. And so that's when we started working with bakers to introduce rice as, to make cakes out of it. Just to also something I wanted to check with Dr. Dharani is, I said it so many times, but a lot of people have the misconception that rice has gluten in it. And, and half the time you're trying to tell them it's glutinous rice, not gluten.
Zero gluten.
Yeah.
Nothing to worry. That's another point you can give. Because people are looking for zero gluten food.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
So because of all of that, so then we said, let's try and make cakes out of it. So then we started working with bakers to make cakes. And we found that these cakes work really well, especially the black rice, because it has a natural sticky consistency to it. We've done a lot of cakes with it. We've done a lot of short eats, your typical murukku, tengural, all the South Indian snacks that you either ways would have done with a polished white rice. We've done it with a brown or red rice, and it comes out well. We also, this year, right before COVID, we had launched the butters and badams, the fryams out here, and it had done so well. I mean, the texture is pretty much the same. So we were just trying to tell people that you don't need to choose a polished rice. You can make the same treats with a black or red or a brown rice, and it's best if you use a good rice. So
Yeah. Dr. Dalal, you mentioned Gobindo Bhog. So we were just wondering if you could probably just regale us with some interesting nuggets around the Gobindo Bhog. I remember also tasting the Gobindo Bhog when I visited Manjakudi. There was a really interesting session, right, Jayanti? There was a Gobindo Bhog, right? Right.
Yeah.
Could you share a story or two?
So Gobindo Bhog is the one of the premium rices of Eastern India, especially of Bengal. And it's highly prized because the Bengalis, one of the most ubiquitous desserts, very much like the South, is a payasam called payesh. And unlike the huge variety of payasams that you have in South India, in Bengal, excuse me, basically payesh is mainly a rice-based dish. And the most sought after rice for this is Gobindo Bhog. And that's where the name comes from. This is where, this is the bhog made for Krishna. Therefore, it is Gobindo Bhog. So when you worship Krishna, Govinda, as a child, this is what you offer to him. So Balakrishna has Gobindo Bhog Payesh offered to him. And this is the main story behind the name of Gobindo Bhog. And surprisingly, I mean, I'm a complete barbarian when it comes to these rules. So I find it makes an amazing khichdi. Okay. I thought, I was doing something blasphemous. And then I found out, quite to my surprise, from my wife's family that no, we do use it. But it's just that it's special rice. So, normally we wouldn't make khichdi out of it.
Khichdi out of it, yeah.
And I was speaking to a good friend of mine, Kanishka, and he said that in Dhaka, they actually make biryani using it. So there is a variant of biryani that is made using Gobindo Bhog.
Gobindo Bhog, okay.
Yeah, and it's not necessary that biryani uses long grain rice. And I know that because so much biryani in South India, for example, uses very small grain rice. Right. So, I keep telling people that rice basically is eaten in the region in which it's grown, you know, and that is the rice you grew up with. Today, transportation networks, a pan-India unified state, etc., has changed so many different things. And very few people in the past ate enormous quantities of rice and only rice. Secondly, as Jayanti will probably be the perfect person to tell you, the kind of rice that we sell in India today, most of the rice that comes out of the Rice Institute is rice that was developed in an emergency to meet the needs of a nation that was starving. So this Gujarat 4, Gujarat 5, Gujarat 6 variety that is out, which is a 90-day rice.
Right.
Okay, it's from the time you sow it to the time you reap it, it's 3 months, which is ridiculous for most traditional rice varieties. Now, this was specifically grown to keep a nation from starving to death. Now that the nation is not starving to death, the nation needs to step back and go back to its original rice, which the nation has forgotten because everybody wants something easy. So my favorite stories of rice are telling people that, you know, there is an enormous amount of healthy rice. And it's not healthy because it's brown or it's red. That is an added factor to it, but there is rice that is healthy on its very own. Please don't eat the cheap rice. And don't go in for the cheap rice. Put a little more effort into your rice. But, you know, nobody farms because they want to. Akila, this is something that is very difficult to explain to anybody in a city. Nobody farms because they want to any longer. They farm because they have to. You know, I mean, there's nothing more exciting you would think than sitting in a field and watching grass grow, because that is what farmers do. And you can't think of anything more mind-numbing than that, can you?
Yeah.
And it's intensively hard labor. If the rains fail, you're buggered. If there's too much rain, you're buggered. If it rains at the wrong time, you're buggered. So this way or that way, it's a very, very hard life as a farmer.
Absolutely.
And we don't even give our farmers their due. We are paying much less money for our food than we should be. You know, we keep thinking that food is expensive. We don't realize, if you look across the world, that our food is not that expensive. And rice is a staple crop. The government tries its best to do what it can do. But you can't leave everything to the government. And that's why people like Jayanti are making a huge difference. There are so many varieties of rice in Bengal. I think there is a counterpart to Jayanti. I'm trying to remember what they're called in Bengal. There's one called Amar Khamar. And Amar Khamar is trying to do exactly what Jayanti is trying to do. And bringing back a lot of rice like this.
Right.
And actually going to small farmers and saying, so they have a slightly different model from Jayanti's maybe. They go to the small farmer and say, we'll support you, we'll buy all your rice. You please grow this variety. Okay? And then they tell the people. But what we've got to realize is that this is something that can only be done by those who are now affluent and well off. Only we can patronize this rice.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of farmers, you know, I wanted to ask Dr. Dharani a question that Jayanti and I put together about, you know, the kanji. And now everybody is, what is the rice that's fermented, Jayanti? That's, people are making that. Sorry?
Right. So I think we were wanting to ask her about the kanji.
Kanji,
and, yeah. So basically, Doctor, the thing is, just to add before that, Akila, to what Dr. Dalal said is that, so earlier, right now we have all the transportation means and technology to get rice from different states. But how rice traveled earlier, I've been told by farmers, is when a farmer grows a particular seed in his village or in his land, and he has a really good crop, he takes those seeds as a gift and he hands it over to whoever he's meeting. And that's how it traveled. And he gave it with a lot of pride. That's how it actually traveled across the country. For instance, there is a grain, I don't know if Dr. Dalal has heard about it. It's called Kerala Sundari, but it's a West Bengal rice. And, you know, everybody would think, why is it called Kerala Sundari? Nobody knows. But a whole group of 1,000-odd farmers out there in West Bengal are cultivating this, and it's native to West Bengal. So we kind of assume, you know, when we've spoken to a couple of them, it could have traveled all the way from Kerala, and, you know, it's now theirs. Yeah. So
much like this happens.
Sorry?
So much like this actually happens. You know, there is I mean, like I said, we can. You guys are going to stop me if I'm going on for too long, okay? The professor sometimes forgets when to stop. But there is so much exchange like this. Let me give you an example of Western India. In Western India, the main transporters of everything were the Dhangar community. And today the Dhangars are sheep goat pastoralists. They were originally cattle pastoralists, and they had very, very large herds of cattle. 2,000 cattle in a single herd have been recorded in the past. So on the backs of these cattle would be panniers, and in these panniers, goods would cross, the Western Ghats into the Konkan, into the Desh, and into Gujarat. And there was an amazingly symbiotic relationship between Gujarat and Maharashtra, and a lot of rice from Gujarat came to Maharashtra on a regular basis. And the Dhangars were a two-part process of this rice transfer. So rice would not grow in Gujarat had it not been for the Dhangars, because the Dhangars would go from village to village once they unloaded their stuff, okay, and their animals would rest in the fields of people growing rice. So you'd invite them to rest in your field for a day, 2 days, 3 days, which meant that the dung and the urine of those animals, those herds that rested in your field, would therefore be automatically the manure.
Yeah.
Okay, you didn't have to collect manure for yourself. Your manure came to you. And on the return journey, after foraging through Gujarat in the rains, they would carry the previous year's rice back with them to Maharashtra. And they'd be back in the monsoons, before the monsoons in Gujarat, with goods for Gujarat. So these kinds of deals, so all kinds of interesting things moving across the country. And as you said, I completely believe that if there is a rice called Kerala Sundari that is grown in Bengal, it could have come from Kerala. There's a very, very high degree of possibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And just asking Dr. Dharani about the kanjis. That's something from morning. A lot of farmers, what is it about the kanji that makes it so nutritious? Because a farmer's meal, even in Manjakudi, even today, it comprises of a kanji from last night, and then he heads out to the field.
Parede, yeah.
Correct. So this parede or cold rice, as it's called in the star hotels, is basically rice which is fermented overnight, and then you take it as it is with the water and all that. And today, with so much being spoken about the good bacteria or probiotics, it is one of the best things to have. Even in this pandemic, we tell people to have, because it helps in immunity. And there is a professor of mine, Dr. Usha Antony, who did her PhD on how the B vitamin goes up when you are, when you ferment it. And there are tons of good things. And it is like, see, once you keep rice overnight, a small quantity of rice can be eaten by many people because it has bulged up, right? And the fermentation plus the water, and what they used to eat it with is usually a lime pickle or a citron pickle or onion, right? So these are all very good things in combo, which creates nutrition. So that is why today it's being told that people, and more so with millets, like, today all of us, what we do is, whatever remaining, we dump it in the refrigerator and we forget about it. Either we remove it after a week, or we just junk it, right? So waste of food is very, very cruel to the environment itself.
Absolutely.
Right? So my latest is that before, like even adai, we would put little molagapadi or something and keep it overnight. But now I realize anything, whether it's pongal or upma, or I make idli out of the adai batter, because I ferment it for a day, then it gives hard idlis, then I make upma out of it. Even that stays with a little bit of curd overnight, and it doesn't spoil. So this is the message that they had taken. They had fermented it without curd and used the curd as an add-on and sour curd, right? So now I think we should learn this, because the refrigerator has become like, just throwing things in and you don't know what's happening. And then you're throwing it out, and food should never be thrown out. It's not fair.
Right. True. Right. Jayanti, I know that you have some things on your table that you haven't yet shown us. Could you just show us some of the varieties of rice and maybe talk about them?
Sure. I'm just trying to figure out how you change the camera.
Just the camera, the mode, instead of the selfie mode, you can.
Yeah.
Or you may
She's
just
turning
want to-
that. I can share that I had gone to a meeting where every dish, about 30 dishes were made only with traditional rice. And it
Wow.
was served in a star hotel. Amazing. You know, then only I realized there's so many things you can do. Of course, Jayanti was an eye opener, but that was, 30 odd dishes just made from traditional rice, from salad to desserts to everything. Yeah.
Dr. Dharani, what rice do you eat every day? I'm so curious.
I keep moving. I keep moving a lot. It's semi-polished, or I get the traditional variety, which, other people give to me.
And what about you, Dr. Dalal?
So, what kind of rice do I eat at home? So, I won't say I don't eat basmati rice. I do eat basmati rice off and on.
Sure. Yeah.
We eat a lot of ambe mohor.
Okay.
When we can get our hands on Gobindobhog, which is not so easy to get in Bombay. I live in the suburbs of Bombay, New Bombay,
Right.
and it's normally a 25-30 kilometer journey for me just to get Gobindobhog rice.
Yeah.
So when my wife wants a lot of Bengali things, then we go together and get
some.
from Chembur. Where in Chembur market, there's a specialized shop. So there's Gobindobhog. There's some very interesting rice. There's one beautiful word called Dudeshwar.
Uh-huh.
Dudeshwar. So Dudeshwar actually translates as top of milk or malai.
Oh,
But
Dudeshwar.
you see, basically an upper brown share of a more complex word. Dudeshwar.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. And a rice offered to the gods, to Shiva. But it's become Dudeshwar. So Dudeshwar or Dudeshwar has become Dudeshwar.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful white rice. It looks like milk when it's there, when it's polished. Now, most of the people of Eastern India eat a polished rice. But even there in the polished rice, and while I agree with Dharani ma'am that yes, polishing does take away a lot of the nutrients of rice, they eat a lot of fish with it. And you see, they are compensating in other ways. It's when you have a purely vegetarian diet and then you have polished rice that you are kind of adding to your misery. When you're taking on a lot of protein otherwise. So if you go to the villages of Odisha, for example, where they eat rice 3 times a day, in the morning they eat leftover rice from the night, which is into which you put water and you allow it to ferment. So it's called pakhal bhat. And pakhal bhat is always eaten with a little bit of fried dried fish or fried fresh fish.
Right.
And today we are suddenly waking up in the West to what is being called firm, which is the cool word for fermentation. And you see all these 5-star restaurants and you see all these Michelin-starred restaurants talking about fermentation. And I find it hilarious because across India, from north to south and east to west, we've been eating fermented foods forever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, completely. And because this climate is so good for fermentation. Fermentation happens so fast in our climate. So, look at a good typical mix that you get for idlis. As Dharani was saying, you make idlis on day 1, you make dosas on day 2, you make paniyarams or appes on day 3.
Yeah.
And if there's something still left, you can still make something on day 4 out of it.
Absolutely, that's the beauty of it,
You can keep pulling it forward. So you don't really have to make it in tiny quantities and soak it every day. And the refrigerator is something that you should use positively, not negatively.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a really good point. Jayanti, sorry, you had set it up and we had to.
Right. Okay. So I've just listed a couple of grains out here for people to see. So we have like fragrant grains. All these are Marvaya, Katarni, and Bakul Fool, Adan Shilpa, Kala Jeera. So Kala Jeera was, I think, the first grain that I was exposed to, which is fragrant non-basmati, It is also called the baby basmati, and it's a rice from Orissa. Very, very small, tiny little grains. So that goes well. My current favorite right now is Kamini Bhog, which is from West Bengal. It's a lovely grain. It has a very sweet scented fragrance to it.
Okay.
And you have a lot more. You have your traditional Tuyamali, and these are what we classify as everyday table rice. Garjan Champa, Kerala Sundari. This is the Kerala Sundari I actually mentioned. Yeah. So yeah.
Oh, that one. Okay. Lovely.
And a lot of black variations. Chahau, Manipur rice. We basically, this is this is my most premium rice, only for the main reason that we got it pure Highland seed from a farmer's family who've been cultivating it for about 7 or 8 generations. And he only gave about 200 grams of seeds after about 4 or 5 months of calls and WhatsApp messages, and then he gave it to us. And now after about 5 years, it grows really well in Manjipudi. So that's the thing about heritage rice, which is that it can grow in any kind of climatic condition. It is pest resistant, and most farmers have often said that all they have to do is sow the seeds and go back only for harvest. So it works for them as well. Yeah.
All right. I think there's one question. I am just trying to find the question. Just give me a second.
So there was, just before that for Dr. Dalal, there was a question that came in. But I think that's going to take an entire session by itself. It was about what his theory on the domestication of rice is. But I think we should do that.
We'll have to do a separate episode on that.
I'll be delighted to do this. Yeah. I mean, I guess after all this conversation about rice, it's like, one is also kind of like getting ready for lunch. I suppose I don't want to Jayanti was also keen that we wrap by 1 p.m. So I don't want to, take up more of your time, but there's just one question. And I think the person is just typing it. If we just take that one question and we can.
Can I ask Jayanti a question while that person is typing?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Jayanti, what about terroir? How does the change in terroir make a difference to the rice? When we move a rice that grows in the foothills of the Himalayas and grow it in the Kaveri Delta.
So, okay. So what happens is definitely there are some grains. So since we are more into seed conservation, it's okay for us. We kind of just keep the seeds alive and we do that. But there have been some crops haven't done well at all in Manjipudi. It is true because they come from different climatic conditions. It definitely affects the yield. That's the first thing that happens. Then there is definitely about a 15 to 20% deviation in the original taste and fragrance that was particular. It is like, for instance, there are people who have picked up Gobindabhog from West Bengal farmers, and when they come to Chennai and they try it out, they say it's not as fragrant as it is in West Bengal. I said, obviously. It is not really as fragrant as what you get there. The climatic, soil conditions, all of that do affect the kind of the grain that is that yields out for us.
Okay, so then that does make a difference to the taste.
It
you
does.
have actually recorded it, not just technically.
No. So we the first time we came to know about it was exactly the case in point was Gobindabhog. When people who have actually tasted Gobindabhog from West Bengal farmers where they picked it up to where they tasted ours, the grain looks the same, the size is the same, everything is pretty much the same, but there will be a mild difference in taste.
There's also green rice. I've kept being asked this by a number of people, that there is rice which is green, unlike brown or yellow or red before it's polished. Have you ever come across a green rice?
So I haven't come across a green rice. There have been, I don't recall the grain, but there have been 1 or 2 grains where once you've milled it as a raw rice, there's a tinge of greenness around it. It is there. So I was told that when I did ask them, the farmers told me it was because you didn't let the rice rest after the harvest. We usually let it rest for about 6 months before we begin milling.
Yes.
So they said you should have let it rest. You might have milled it right after harvest.
Oh,
possibly. That's the reason
that would give you a green rice.
That's an interesting,
Very interesting.
Also, I was told by Chef, we work with Chef Anumitra of Edible Archives in Goa. And so she had once said that, the minute, if you harvest the rice, if you mill the rice right after harvest, the fragrance is much stronger.
Yes, also the starch content.
Yeah.
So there's just one question and anybody on the panel can respond to it. It's from Vandana Kumar, and she asks, people say that rice farming uses a lot of water, and is rice farming bad for the environment because it uses a lot of water? And how can we justify, therefore, rice farming if it negatively impacts the environment? Any of you could respond to that question?
Actually, I can, though
Sure.
I'm not directly related to it. But the thing is, I'm part of an organization called EcoScience Research Foundation, where I've even taught organic farming way down in Cuddalore. So we have met farmers and all that. And they say that even in the deserts of India, rice was grown with very little water. So there are different strains of rice, and it's not necessary that you have to have a lot of water to grow every rice. And the second thing is that when wheat became part of the PDS system and rice became part of the PDS system versus millet, they started growing different types of rice which need, because in 90 days, as it was already mentioned, they need that, stocking of water. But otherwise, there are fantastic irrigation methods where you don't really have, you don't have to have the water, but it like sprinkles little by little and the rice grows very well. Maybe Jayanti can add on.
Okay. Yeah. So the only thing about heritage rice, that's why we keep insisting that farmers cultivate it, is it is drought tolerant, saline tolerant. It's very adaptable to any kind of condition that you put it under. So that's why obviously rice does take a lot of water, but like Dr. Dharani said, there are a lot of innovative methods, especially I think Iran and all these countries are using drip irrigation to cultivate their rice. So yeah, but unfortunately, it is an expensive affair to expect farmers or NGOs to get into a form of trying and experimenting with these methods, but it is possible.
To add to this, what you've got to understand is that growing rice in a region that is not conducive to growing rice is a waste of water. So rice is traditionally grown in regions which have a certain degree of water density, a certain degree. So marshy areas, so on and so forth, in desert regions would be used to cultivate rice.
Yeah.
So rice would not be cultivated in the middle of the desert. It would be cultivated at the marshes in a desert. And there's so much wild rice that grows like this even today, like Oryza rufipogon in India, Oryza nivara in India. So what you got to understand is when you force cultivate rice and you cultivate rice in ridiculous quantities and not any other grain, then you have a problem of wasting water.
Yeah. There's just one more question. It is from Chitra Warrior. And she'd like to know if fermented rice is reheated, then is it unhealthy?
Absolutely, it shouldn't be reheated. The best thing is the bacteria, and once you heat it, the bacteria dies, right? So we have to eat it as it is. And that's the beauty of fermented rice.
Right. Dr. Dharani, but I remember that, recently, during this pandemic, a friend of mine had posted, because like food and showcasing food pictures is the new thing. She had posted this beautiful photograph of pared, like fermented rice, with some lovely little shallots and very beautiful looking picture. And then there was this huge argument on Facebook where somebody started talking about how, for farmers, like because they did so much physical labor, it was justified to eat the pared. But like for us, like urbanites who hardly do that kind of, manual labor, like is probably like just going to, that amount of calories is probably not good. Would you just be able to respond to that? I'm not entirely sure we addressed this when we talked about it.
No. Actually, the calories are less because you're making it voluminous with water. So that's why I said a little bit of rice can be eaten by many people, right? In fact, there's a poem which my mother-in-law used to say, I don't remember, but it's simply to say that when it's rice as rice, you need that many people. But the moment you have more people come in, either you make a khichdi or you make it into pared for more people to have.
People to consume.
Or as kanji, right? So that means we're dividing that rice. So actually the calories goes down. So there's nothing to say that, you need to do hard work to eat pared. Not at all.
Right. And I think that's a beautiful thing that we're going to be closing the session on, this whole idea of dividing. And I'd like to use another word of sharing instead of dividing. And I think what Spirit of the Earth and what both of you did is really shared so much knowledge with us. And really, you know, I do think, and I think somebody had used the word mindful when we talked in the opening of the session, that I think what is really more important is really to be mindful of what we eat, because every little thing is so, you know, packed with so much interesting little nuggets of history and trivia and heritage and all of this. I think we've been very, very fortunate to have such an eminent panel. Thank you, Jayanti, for bringing Dr. Dalal and Dr. Dharani on board. We truly appreciate that. Thank you so much. Just any shout out for rice that you'd like to finally, you know, closing comments on rice, all three of you?
Rice is absolutely good for health. Don't worry about it. You can eat it the right way, whatever disease you have.
Fabulous. Dr. Dalal?
Enjoy your rice, appreciate your rice, eat local rice, keep local rice varieties and farmers in business, and eat other things with your rice. Don't eat rice with your rice.
I agree with you.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Jayanti?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with Dr. Dalal, but I also want to tell them that, you know, just every time you get into a store to pick up rice, whatever it is, just not just rice, but any product, ask them how it's made, where it comes from, the source of it. You know, don't just pick it up because it says, yeah, just, yeah, I think we all have a mind. We can think for ourselves. Is it really hand pound? Is it possible to get hand pound rice? Yeah, I mean, just ask the questions, the basic questions, and then pick it up, you know. So once you make that kind of conscious decision, you will know what you're eating.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Jayanti, are you guys available online? Can we shop for Spirit of the Earth online?
Yeah. So we have a basic website up, and it's called spiritoftheearth.in, and everything that's cultivated on the farm is there. So I mean, yeah, some grains have a very good yield. Some grains we only have 100 kilos for that whole year. So whatever's available is online for anybody who wants it.
Super. Thank you so much once again. It was fabulous to be able to, you know, speak with each and all of you. You know, thank you for adding so many valuable insights to this conversation. And thank you to everybody who tuned in. This conversation, a recorded version of this conversation, will be available on our Labs YouTube channel. Our next episode on sustenance features Dr. Uma Ram, gynecologist, who will talk about dancing through different phases of womanhood. That's scheduled for Sunday at 6 p.m. I do hope you all will log in. Thank you once again, and have a super weekend. I don't know whether weekend and weekdays in the context of the now really matters, but have a great weekend and stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you once again. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks for having us, Yakila, and thank you, Jayanti, for introducing me here.
Bye.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.